You know, the number one rule of podcasting is if you're ever going to have a guest on, make sure that it's someone who knows the score. And there's very few people who know the score better than this handsome bastard. We got the brilliant MARC BERNARDIN on. Mr. Bernardin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing incredibly well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. And I'm not going to try to trick you into spoiling any of your shows, but Picard finale says what?
Nice try. I have nothing to do with the Picard finale other than as a viewer, and I was as surprised as anybody else was.
But one of the things I've got to ask you, because obviously there's this coronavirus thing going on. For those who don't know MARC BERNARDIN, of course, I'll have done the intro before this. He's a pretty successful writer, podcaster, and also, I guess, in a way, a film/TV critic. And I always love your takes on stuff. And thanks to coronavirus, have you heard of that?
Yeah, I'm a little familiar.
Well, I was watching this film last night. It was a Kiefer Sutherland horror film called Mirrors, your favorite. And there was a one point in the film where he wakes up and walks past the room, past this lady, and he goes, "Oh, hey sis, how's it going?" And she says, like, "Darren, you're my brother," and they kept referring to each other as brother and sister. So, as a writer, what's that like for you when they have such forced relationships, dialogue like that?
It's never ideal, you know. Like you shouldn't have two people talking to each other, relaying information they should both already know. You know, like you see that in like cop procedurals all the time. It's like, you should know this, doctor. There's no reason you should be able to operate with this. It's like, yeah, I'm a doctor. I know this. You know, it's hard because you're saying that to give information to the audience, but you have to make the characters, like, in the scene, not feel like idiots for not knowing things they should know.
It's like there's that classic scene in Casino Royale where the police officer is explaining how to play blackjack to the lady who hangs out in the casino. They go, "Yes, I fucking know."
Yeah, it's not a hard game. I understand how this works. That's an all-in bet. It's everything he's got. Like, yeah, no, it's fine.
If he gets more than 21, they'll cut his balls off. It's like, yeah. But the other one I noticed, and this is from your other favorite film, the Adam Sandler classic, Just Go With It. And your favorite actor, Nick Swardson, walks into a room, and Adam Sandler goes, "Oh, look, it's my cousin Johnny, who's also my best friend." And I go, "Who'd you say that to?"
Yeah, what's that for?
But I've got to ask you, as a writer, can you actually watch film and TV shows and enjoy it, or as a fan, or do you watch it and analyze it and go, I don't know if I'd have had Sly Stallone say that line?
It's funny. I get a question like this relatively frequently. Well, it's less a question, and it's more like a shout on Twitter, which is, why can't you just watch a movie? And, you know, I can. It is entirely possible for me to just sit down and watch a movie. If the movie is engaging me, I find myself less able to start poking holes in it. You know what I mean? Like, and when I watch a movie like Mad Max Fury Road, first time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, would you look at this movie? Look at all this stuff. Like, it's brilliant. It's awesome. Like, it's everything I've ever wanted. And then, like, the second time you watch it, it's like, there's no real story. It's, we're driving to this place. Turns out to be a bust. We're going to turn around and drive back to that place. That's all that movie is. It's like a road trip that then makes a U-E and then goes back to the beginning. But there's so much going on in that movie that you don't notice that that's all that it is. Like, there's a lot happening with Furiosa and Max and the women and the world building. Like, all of it is so well done that, like, very often it's the second or third time that I watch a movie. Like, oh, well, you know, that part's a little thin or that part's a little waffly. But if the movie's not operating on any cylinders, I start noticing that shit right away. I start just playing, oh, well, why is he doing that? Well, that doesn't make much sense. Wouldn't it have been cooler if he did this?
Yeah, it's like one of my all-time favorite films is Hate, and it's 3 hours long, and the entire story is cop tries to stop robber,
Mm.
and it's 3 hours, and it's one of the greatest films ever. And you don't notice that until the 75th time I watch it.
Yeah, like I don't believe that a movie experience that's in any way a good one can ever find you turning your brain off to enjoy a movie. It's like, that's no, like I paid my 13, 14, $15. Like, you have to perform for me. This business equation. I want to be entertained. I gave you money for it, so entertain me. And I don't believe in sort of lowering my standards to let them get off easy.
Picard finale says what? But of course, with coronavirus at the minute, nobody's getting out to the cinema. Nothing's being released. TV shows are halting production. But do you think that when this is done, coronavirus is finished, that it's going to change the way certain blockbusters are made? Like, maybe studios are going to say, let's not spend 600 million on this film, when really, because for that to be a profitable hit, that needs almost like to become part of pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
So could you see it maybe going back to being more like in the 90s, where they have films with big stars just on a smaller scale?
I don't think so. I think that what is going to happen, and sadly, because I loved that period of like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s when you just made movies. And you made big movies and small movies and medium-sized movies, and they all had movie stars in them. They all got theatrical releases, and you had a buffet to choose from when you went to the cinema, right? But I think what's going to happen is Hollywood is going to interpret the bloom post-coronavirus of trying to get people back to theaters. There's going to be a certain level of fear. Like, should we be gathering in public places? Should we be, sitting next to each other in ways that we had been just blissfully ignorant of before? And the way they're going to try to entice us out of our houses and apartments and underground bunkers is, you have to see this giant movie on screens. You can't watch it at home. You can't just stream it. You have to leave the house to see it. That's how we're going to drive people back into theaters. And so, like, yes, there's already the stuff that had been shot that's been postponed. There's your Fast and Furious 9. There's your Black Widow. There's, these sort of gigantic Quiet Place 2s, these big-ass movies that were supposed to be in theaters, in, like, April and May and June. They're gonna entice us out with that stuff. But I think even going forward, it's going to get a little bit more polarized, where the stuff that is in theaters is going to be even more extravagant and phenomenal and exploitive and showy. And then the other end is going to be, even the stuff the indie stuff is going to get even more indie. And that more of it will go streaming, and more of it, because they'll have taught us how to do that. You can now watch Invisible Man at home. You can now watch Frozen 2 at home. Like, Onward went from theaters to video or streaming on demand almost immediately, because they needed to make some money out of this. And they've told us, yeah, you know what? Maybe there's a world in which you do get theatrical movies day and date on your streaming platforms and in the theater. And maybe the kind of movies that do that are smaller and more independent. And yeah, I don't see them being any fear of it. I think it might push them in the other direction of doing more of it.
What's your personal preference to watch a film? Do you like watching it at streaming it at home, or do you like the big screen experience?
I overwhelmingly prefer the big screen experience, and some of that's just the way I grew up, because there's no options. You went to movies. I'm an old man, and so every movie was, yeah, man, let's go to the movies. Maybe it'll come to home video in a year, and even home video is not the ideal way to watch a movie. That said, there are some movies that benefit more from the big screen than others, and some movies that, like, do I need to see Step Brothers in a movie theater? Probably not. The cinematic experience is not going to enhance it. What does enhance it is the crowd. Comedies are better in crowds than they are by yourself. Do I need to watch Parasite with a crowd? Probably not. Like, it works very well as a kind of intimate, claustrophobic experience. But the visuals are beautiful enough. I want to see them 50 feet wide. I kind of think that in almost every way, I prefer being in a theater than at home, unless I'm like lazy and infirm or sick, in which case, yeah, or it's a movie I've already seen like a dozen times. Sure, I
But
could watch Trading Places at home.
well, Trading Places, of course, could never be made these days. It's so dark, and every year I watch it as the politically correct climate rises. You think
Mhm.
there's rape jokes, there's racism, there's a blowjob, there's a suicide attempt, there's drugs, there's full frontal nudity. I love it. Uh, but I got to ask you as well. You're talking about seeing certain films specifically for the big screen. Uh, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I'll die on my deathbed saying that I think Attack of the Clones is a great Star Wars film. I love it. But do you think, or would you agree that Star Wars has frankly uh, peaked or overdone itself?
um, I am like Star Wars is my first fandom. You know, like it's the first thing that I was like, I'm going to buy the toys of. I'm going to get the sheets. I'm going to get the blenders. I'm going to buy everything you can buy. I'm going to watch these movies 1,000 times, and I did, and I still do. Um, I think that it has not benefited from lack of vision to a certain degree. Um, I think that for better or for worse, the first six Star Wars movies had one person at the helm. You know, I mean, even if George only wrote and directed four out of those six, he was still the creative driving force behind them all, and it had a singularity of vision. It knew what it was, and it knew the story it wanted to tell. Whether or not it told those stories, you know, with varying degrees of success or quality, is independent of he knew what he wanted to say. Um, the latter three, you know, the 7, 8, 9 of the series felt blurry in that way, and that there was no cohesive creative vision. Sometimes that's an interesting tension, right? When, you know, JJ makes Force Awakens, and then Ryan comes in for The Last Jedi, and those are two different people kind of trying to tell a story that's responding to the other one. It can give you some interesting um, uh, tension and friction and conflict, and drama is all about conflict. But then to like undo it all in the next movie, and then kind of just I'm going to do the thing I wanted to do, and it gets blurry. I think it's good that we step away from Star Wars for a little bit. I think Star Wars benefits from distance. You know, Star Wars is a nostalgia-driven enterprise, and you can't be nostalgic for something you get every other year. It requires time away. It requires you to need to be fond of it again and be able to overlook all of its faults again. I think Attack of the Clones is one of the weaker movies in there, but there's still interesting things in it. Like, that was always a thing that I came to love about Star Wars, is that even the worst of these has moments that you've never seen before, has, you know, sequences that are just dazzling. And I think Attack of the Clones has some of those. I think Phantom Menace has some of those. I think all of them have some of those sequences where you're like, oh my God, this feels like Star Wars. And this is a new thing that I've never seen before. And for that, I'm super glad that they exist. But I could also do with a little bit of time away.
Is it ever frustrating for you in a way, and that's probably a poor choice of words, when you're on the Hollywood Babylon podcast with, or no, sorry, let me say that, when you're on the Fat Man Beyond podcast with the very shy, quiet Kevin Smith, and you guys are reviewing the latest TV show film, you generally have a take on it that, and I'm not just saying it because we're on the air, that when you review like, fuck, I don't know, Blade 2, and you go, oh fuck, that's actually a great idea if they'd have gone his way. Is it ever frustrating for you though when you're like part of a writing team, or you pitch a project to a studio and they say no, and it comes out and it's like, well, we had this really dark take on I don't know, Fantastic Four or 3, but instead we went for a musical version, and they're all rappers and they're all jazz and they surf and all this shit. So is it ever frustrating for you when you go, but I said so?
You know, frustrating is a little harsh for what it is. Because, I mean, frustration is, it's when you're, like, in the writer's room and you're like, hey, we should do A. And we deliberate over it, and then somebody makes the decision to do B, and then it comes out, and the audience is like, you know what, they really should have done A. It's a little frustrating when you were actually, in the room where it happens, and you had the capacity to, and you said the thing you wanted to say, and it just fell on deaf ears. That can be frustrating. It's less frustrating when I'm, pitching a movie or pitching a TV show, or in a way that I have no authority or no real, agency in how to affect the outcome. Then it's just like a little sad. It's like, oh, guys, you didn't need to do that. I told you how to do it, and you didn't do it. And then there's sometimes where I'll tell them my pitch, and they'll do something else, and something else comes out better. And I'm like, oh, well, best idea wins. Best idea should always win. And some of that is just having a healthy ego that can withstand a certain amount of full frontal assaults. Like, oh, I took a hit on that one. Okay, well, now let's keep on pitching. Let's come up with a new idea. But yeah, it's a little. It takes some discipline to not say "I told you so."
Well, one of the things I love when you do is when you sort of talk about how you would reboot or make a sequel to a shit film. Like, for example, I remember when the 2015 Fantastic Four came out, which was shit, and there's no denying it. It's shit. That could cause world peace. The level of shit that film was. I remember you had a reboot pitch, and it was like you could cast Denzel Washington as Reed Richards, and it would be like sort of not a family take, but it would be sort of a more lighthearted spin. And I thought, yes, but if they said to you, Mark, we want you to reboot and be in charge of the new Blade reboot, because before we had 3 films that were like quite horrors, dark, violent, gory. How would you, with choice, reboot it? I
mean, not that Marvel is going to give me any money at all to make Blade, because my guess is they've got it well in hand. But I think that given that it's Marvel and they've yet to make a rated R movie, it can't quite be horror, not on the level that I think horror fans might want it to be. So it's got to be a little less about the viscera of vampires. It's got to be a little less about we're hunting and there's blood everywhere and whatever, because you got to be able to take kids to see this. But I think that there's a lot to say right now. I think the vampire as a mode of storytelling is always somewhat reflective of the times that you're in, right? Like Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, in the wake of the plague, right? Well, the plague was still within living memory. And that idea of some kind of virus or some kind of pathogen that was laying waste to lots of people, like, all right, what if it's a person? What if a person is that pathogen? And then you spend a lot of time, in the 80s and Anne Rice and vampirism becomes a sort of mode to tell stories about HIV and AIDS and the communicable diseases of blood. And then it also gets to be a story about, women and feminism and blood being the vehicle and, virgins very often being the most desired thing. Like it becomes a little bit like an easy putty, a silly putty for letting you tell the stories you want to tell depending on the time that you're in. And so I think right now there's a way to tell a story about what it means for Blade to be ultimately biracial. He's half human and half vampire, and he's unique among all of them because he can walk during the day, and what it means to not feel like you're a part of either world, but instead actually have the best of both worlds. And for a very large part of this population that's growing every day of not knowing precisely where they think they fit in, whether that be people who are biracial, whether that be people who are trans and transitioning and have gender fluidity issues and all that stuff, like what it means to find your own place feels like a really good metaphor to explore through a movie like Blade.
Are you happy with the casting of Mahershala Ali?
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce his name, sorry.
Mahershala, yeah.
Oh,
No, he's great. I mean, the dude's got, he seems to be collecting Oscars like they're toys at the bottom of a cereal box. He's fantastic, and I think I think so much of his work has been very serious, but I think he has got a twinkle in his eye and can have some fun with something like Blade. And I don't think a guy like that signs on because we're just going to pay you a lot of money. I think he signs on because he's going to get a kick out of it.
yeah.
And that's kind of what you want. You want somebody to have a really good time playing Blade. The same way Wesley Snipes had a good time playing Blade. Yeah.
I am really looking forward to it, but for me personally, if I could have cast Blade, I'd have gone with I think his name is it John David Washington,
Oh, yeah, Denzel's son.
and I'd have cast Denzel as Whistler,
That's fun.
and I'd have sort of gone. I would have ripped off Fury Road, and I'd have done that with vampires, and instead of during the day, it's at night, and Blade is trying to save, as you say, these virgin kids who are going to be fed and turned. But I never thought we'd be talking about eating virgins together. This is going fantastic.
Hey, you never can tell where you're going to end up.
But I gotta tell you, as you may or may not be able to tell, I hide it so well. I'm a total nerd when it comes to sci-fi and your favorite wrestling. And back in 2001, there was a match. It was The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in this giant stadium. It was the biggest match there's ever been. It was the most money made in one night ever. And ever since that night in 2001, it's always stayed big, but it peaked and it's been downhill. To me, that's what happened with Marvel and Avengers Endgame. That I think that was as humanly big as it could get, box office wise, story wise, and now it's on the downfall. So, would you agree with that, or do you think Marvel will be able to be bigger?
I think that everything is cyclical, right? Like every sports franchise, amazing run will eventually have a rebuilding phase. I think that every movie series or TV show that you like will have its peak and then will eventually just find ways to sustain itself. I think Marvel did a thing that nobody else had ever done before, which is tell a 22 movie story that was going to have an ending and going to culminate in something insane. And that level of drag, of gravity, of inertia was impossible to foresee and may or may not be irreplicable. I'm not sure. But I think that the things that happened post Avengers Endgame will by definition need to be smaller because we've solved the very first big problem we had. We killed Thanos, which we've been building to since whatever the hell it was, 2009 with Iron Man. 10 years, 20 movies like to tell that story. And so, I think we're at the beginning of a new phase and a new era. And so it's going to be smaller for a bit. Like we're not going to be seeing movies making $2 billion out of the Marvel house for a while, but they will build to something else. They will have to, whether that something else involves Blade and the X-Men and Fantastic Four, who knows? But I think that there's definitely, there's going to be a quiet before the next storm. And that quiet's probably going to last, 5 or 6 years before they get us back into that mode of, I have to see all of these because I know we're building to something.
Mark Bernardin is so smart that he accidentally made a really great pun, The Next Storm.
Ah.
But the rumor I've heard at the minute is that, it's been confirmed that Christian Bale, Mr. Nice Guy, is cast in Thor 4. But the big theory around people is that he's playing Galactus, and that Galactus is the next big villain of the MCU. But my whole worry as a fan is it just going to be the same thing again? Only instead of Thanos, it's Galactus, and is it just going to be another big battle that ends up in an Avengers death?
Yeah, I mean it's it sure would be tempting to believe that that's where it's going. I mean, you set up some giant, galactic level threat that's coming from the deep universe heading towards Earth with a desire to, just eat it. Which, whatever. That feels like the silliest idea from 1964. What does the bad guy want to do? I don't know. He just wants to eat the Earth. Yeah, okay, sure. That's a thing a kid can understand. He's hungry, so he wants to eat the Earth. I would be disappointed if it was just that. There's going to have to be some big ass threat that puts everything into jeopardy, and that threat needs to be, on a global scale. And so Galactus seems like a very easy solution to that. Like, we need another this. How about that? You got it. But I would be surprised if it was that simple. I wouldn't put it past them to make Galactus part of it, but I would hope that it's not just that again. Here's another spaceship on the horizon. What's it going to do? It's going to destroy everything we know. How do we stop it? Oh, I don't know. Magic and science. Okay, cool.
I just caught the MARC BERNARDIN special move on camera there. But just before we get off the Marvel topic, what have you heard about Black Panther 2, and what's your hopes for it?
I've heard as much as anybody else has, which is not very much at all. My hopes are that, I've always wanted Namor to make an appearance in the MCU, and I think that they set it up a little bit. If you read into Endgame very carefully, there's some in exchange between Natasha and Okoye where she's like, yeah, what about these earthquakes off the Atlantic shelf? And it's like, well, they're earthquakes. We don't do anything about earthquakes. They're earthquakes. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, duh. That's Atlantis rising. And that's Namor sort of starting to make trouble. And if you had Black Panther 2 I remember seeing some illustration that it was like the two kings, the king of Atlantis and the king of Wakanda having to go head to head. I'm all for that. That is super cool. And then that opens up your universe to the Fantastic Four, and that opens up your universe to mutants, and that does, that allows you to begin to tell all those stories that they haven't told before.
Well, if I could make a Black Panther 2, I'd love the villain to be Doctor Doom. She could have Wakanda versus, what is it called, Latveria or Latavia or whatever the fuck it's called. Yeah. And just that thing of the two suits clashing in the Wakandan army versus the Latveria army, which could then maybe cross over into the Fantastic Four or something. I just need it, and I need it fast.
Yeah, I think between Black Panther 2 and Doctor Strange 2, I think we're going to open up the doors to a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, and even Captain Marvel 2, I can't wait for, which I'm surprised at because I hated it the first time I seen it. The second time I thought, that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens in Captain Marvel 2. And Brie Larson is giving her best, and she does a really great job. I think that the movie has its faults and its issues, but I think it does what it needed. It accomplishes what it needed to accomplish, which was help bring the cosmic into the Marvel universe, personified by a singular person. Guardians brought the cosmic in, but now it's like, oh, we have cosmic power in the hands of this woman who we can sort of deploy as we wish.
Well, just as we're coming up to the final question, Picard finale says what?
Oh, you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. But I just got to ask you about the DC universe, because I'm a comic book dirty street whore. I need it, and I'll do whatever I need to make you feel good. I love them. But the first one I never went to the cinema to see since I've been born was Birds of Prey. It just seemed like a complete mess. It looked like, do you ever get, if you're watching the trailer for like the MTV Music Video Awards and you see a montage of all the year's best videos, and there's some dumb voiceover, you're like, Justin Bieber, and others. I'm not really up with modern music. the that's what that trailer looked like to me, and I thought, I don't have like epilepsy, but this could bring it on, and I don't want to see this shit. And it seemed like that was part of the public feeling. And then the fact that Wonder Woman 2, which people forget was actually supposed to be out last year, but was randomly delayed a whole year for no given reason. So the question I've got for you is, or maybe not that I'm putting words in your mouth, but would you say that the DC franchise, it's kind of, despite a lot of successes and a lot of misses, overall it's kind of a mess?
I think DC has it stumbled out of the gate by trying to be Marvel, by trying to do what Marvel did, without having the time to give it the care that Marvel gave it. You know, they come out with Man of Steel. You know, first they come out with, you know, Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, which is very much in line with the way Warner Brothers likes to make movies. We're going to get one filmmaker and let him tell his story or her story over a couple of movies. You know, sometimes it's 3 movies, sometimes it's 7 movies, like with Harry Potter. They're very good about just telling a singular story and giving it the runway that it needs. And then, you know, Marvel comes along and starts intertwining and building a connected universe. And each of these movies is telling, you know, a piece of a larger story. And DC was like, we have the same number of characters. Why don't we do that? But we can't take 10 years to get to the Avengers. We have to do it in 2. You know, and so then you're rushing the storytelling. You're rushing your way from Man of Steel to introducing Batman to then kind of shoehorning in Wonder Woman, and then, you know, doing the Justice League, and then also having a Wonder Woman solo movie on the side. And then, you know, it lacked a certain cohesive vision. And they had no real sort of godhead at the top of that pyramid who was dictating, here's how we're telling our overall story. Zack Snyder wasn't that person. Chris Nolan didn't want to be that person. They never had their Kevin Feige, who, you know, has, you know, had a couple of missteps here and there, but by and large knew the giant story he wanted to tell and figured out how best to parcel that out, and had the massive resources of both Marvel Studios and then Disney behind him to allow him the latitude to be able to do that. DC tried to shotgun their universe into being, and it kind of failed for it. And I think they found success by making these sort of standalone independent movies, just finding a filmmaker who's got a take and go make your movie, go make your Shazam, go make your Joker, go make your Aquaman. Like, these don't need to sort of intertwine with each other. You know, if they glance against each other, that's fine. They can be like the John Hughes universe, where they're all in Shermer, Illinois, and, you know, which doesn't exist, but sure, it's all part of the same world, but we're not telling the same story anymore. And they found some success there. I think the more they lean into that, the better off they're going to be. You know, you're going to get some misfires out of that. You know, I liked Birds of Prey, I think, a little bit more than you did. I think, you know, a certain audience, you know, specifically a female audience, liked it quite a bit more than either of us did, you know, and to a certain degree, that's fine. Like, not every movie needs to be for every person. I don't think it was the movie it could have been. And I'm not sure the reasons why that happened. But that seems to be the way Warner Brothers wants to roll with it, which is, let's find a filmmaker who's got a take, roll the dice. Maybe it'll be Joker and make $1 billion. Maybe it'll be Birds of Prey and make $300 million. Maybe it'll be Suicide Squad and nobody will care. Maybe we'll try Suicide Squad 2 and then everybody will care. I don't know what they want it to be on the other side. You know, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to see a Flash movie or a Cyborg movie. You know, I just think it's, you know, hey, who's got an idea? Who's got a really good idea?
I don't know if it was just me, but I felt that Joker was wildly overrated. And I have a theory to it. It'd be like, right, just say I've got Thriller by Michael Jackson and I've got the Best of the Smiths here on CD. Just say you'd never heard of them before, and I made a blank disc. I'm from the 90s, as you can tell, and I give you this CD of all these songs and go, oh, these are my songs. I wrote The Girl Is Mine. I wrote How Soon Is Now. Aren't I great? So, and that's the Joker. To me, felt like somebody taking the best off, like Martin Scorsese films, and trying to portray it as his own, and the younger audience going, oh, bravo, bravo. And it's like, no, not for me.
Yeah, I think if that movie I mean, granted, it's probably not fair to say this, but I'll say it anyway. If that movie is not called Joker and it's not out of the Batman universe, it doesn't do as well as it did. Because I do think that it is, it's a cover band doing, relatively decent covers of Mean Streets, and Raging Bull and Taxi Driver, and 70s urban malaise, which was a big genre in and of itself back in the 70s and 80s. Let's look back with a little perspective on how awful, New York in the 70s was. And so, yeah, Joaquin's performance is fantastic. I think there's some really interesting stuff. I think it looks phenomenal. I don't think there's a lot of, meat at the center of it, and to a certain audience, they didn't even recognize that it was a cover. They think, Jimi Hendrix wrote All Along the Watchtower. And I'm like, fine, great. But, yeah, I was not enamored with that movie the way some people were. The way, by the sounds of it, the overwhelming majority of this movie going public was. But hey, that's cool. Not every movie's for every person. I'd like to think a comic book movie is for me, but this was not the case.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm a whore, and I'm going to go see Joker 2 anyway, because that's just the kind of slut that I am. But, Mark, I just want to thank you so much for your time doing this. I've stalked and harassed and intimidated and threatened you for well over a year, and it's so glad to finally get meeting you and talking to you. I love your podcast. Castle Rock just started showing on TV here 3 days ago.
Oh, wow.
I'm one episode in. So Picard finale says what?
It says keep watching for Picard season 2.
There we go. Listen, Mark, I just want to thank you again, and I'll do all the normal plugs in editing. And wash your hands. Take care.
I will do just that, my friend. You do the same.